On October 21st, 2021, Alec Baldwin was filming a Western movie entitled Rust in Bonanza Creek, New Mexico. Baldwin was rehearsing a scene with director Joel Souza and cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Baldwin was seated in a church practicing a cross draw with a .45 caliber revolver. As Baldwin practiced pulling the weapon from the left side of his body with his right arm, the gun discharged. The bullet struck Helena Hutchins and Joel Souza. Joel survived, but Helena did not. And now the world is learning everything about what happened on the set that day as Alec Baldwin sits in a courtroom charged with involuntary manslaughter. If convicted, he faces up to 18 months in prison, but he's proclaiming his innocence, pointing the finger at two other people who have already been convicted: the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez, and assistant director, David Halls. Tonight, we are live from Santa Fe, New Mexico, with all the latest from inside the courtroom and outside the courthouse as we investigate the Alec Baldwin movie set shooting. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Day 2 of this high-profile case out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Alec Baldwin. Can you believe Alec Baldwin is on trial for killing another human being? This is unreal. No, how does this happen? I mean, we come back to that, right? How does this happen on the set of a movie? Helena Hutchins, the victim in this case, I mean, she should be alive. She should absolutely be alive. There are a lot of people who didn't do their jobs, a lot of people who are responsible for all of this, including Alec Baldwin. But the question for the jury, is he criminally responsible? But the bottom line is, she should be alive. She's just going to work doing her job. Filming a movie. Why do we have real guns? Why do we have live ammo on the set? Makes no sense to me. What we have learned throughout our coverage of this story and the first trial is that this set, this Rust movie set, was chaotic. Absolutely chaotic. This was not your typical movie set. You know, they film a lot of movies down here in Atlanta, where we are, and you can see how organized these things are, and how there's so many people doing so many specific jobs. And in this case, you had an armorer in charge of the weapons on a Western, and she had responsibilities beyond the weapons. Are you kidding me? Chaos. Obviously, Alec Baldwin is blaming the armorer. He's blaming Hannah Gutierrez. It's her fault, and pretty much from the beginning, and that's their theme throughout this trial, that he relies on other people to do it. So it's their fault, it's not his. Their fault, not Alec Baldwin's fault, because he's an actor. He needs to get into character. He doesn't need to get inside the gun. He doesn't need to check to see if it is safe. But Hannah Gutierrez, that armorer, she was convicted in her trial, but she is a significant part, an important part of this trial. Really important part of this trial. Because that's where the finger's being pointed by the defense. And the question is she responsible, but Alec isn't, or are both of them responsible for what happened to Helena Hutchins? By the way, the judge overseeing this trial, I don't know how well you have noticed her, but she is in charge. Take a look.
I did not want to belabor the point that lengths can kill, okay? But that's different from Mr. Baldwin's own assertions of the knowledge that he had with respect to guns.
She's smart, she's decisive, and she's in charge. Speaking of smart and decisive and in charge, Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft is joining us live outside the courthouse in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And once again, the wind is blowing. I understand there's some weather coming in, so if you have to run, just run, Kelly. Just run, okay, if the weather gets bad. I'll be there next week. I will bring sunshine and heat. Let's talk about court today. Let's talk about the arrivals, the departures of Alec Baldwin and everyone else. How did that look today?
Well, it looked chaotic like usual, Vinnie, because of course when Alec Baldwin arrives, he comes with his entourage, his huge defense team, and his wife. They're always holding hands when they walk into court, and then also when they depart from court as well. So we do have some video of him arriving today, and then also him departing. And it was really interesting upon the departure of Alec Baldwin today, because usually there are a lot of people here, a lot yelling things at Alec Baldwin, saying things like, how do you feel that you killed someone? We want justice for Helena Hutchins. But today we heard someone that actually was a supporter of Alec Baldwin. She's local here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she came up and she was talking with our crew, and she was saying that you heard a little bit of it right there when she said, I think that you're innocent, Mr. Baldwin. And we got a little interview with her afterwards. Why don't we go ahead and play it? You're from here in Santa Fe, and we heard you support Alec Baldwin. We heard you yelling something to him as he walked out of court today. Tell us about that and why you're here.
Well, I basically just really feel bad for him because I think he's unfairly being charged, basically, because he's an actor. I know he was a producer on the film, but he's still an actor at the end of the day. And I think Hannah Gutierrez Reed really had the job to check that gun, and she didn't. And I think he's just being unfairly charged. So that's why I'm kind of backing him up, basically.
So we wanted to talk with her because she was really vocal, as you heard in that little clip when Alec Baldwin and his wife were walking into that SUV that always waits for them outside the courthouse here. So right behind me is the street in front of the courthouse, and then that black SUV pulls up, must get a call that Alec Baldwin and his wife are going to be walking out. And then they come out, and that lady was there, Sheila, and she yelled that she thinks that he is innocent and being unfairly tried. Vinnie?
Well, it's not exactly the crowd that Johnny Depp got at his trial in Virginia, but it's a start for Alec Baldwin. And her feelings are shared by a lot of people, you know, who know a little bit about this case, and some people who know a lot about this case, that he's an actor. He shouldn't be held responsible. And that's why this trial is very, very unpredictable, you know, very unpredictable. Let's go into the courtroom now. So what happened today? What are the big moments?
Most of the day, Vinnie, it was spent with the crime scene technician that was on the stand, Marissa Popel. And so what she was talking about is just the scene, and really on cross-examination, Alec Baldwin's defense counsel, Alex Spiro, was really trying to rip apart her testimony, asking her, did you find all of the live ammunition on the movie set of Rust? And he was questioning a lot of the things that she said. She eventually said, well, I feel I did a reasonable search. So why don't we go ahead and play. This is going to be on the redirect by Carrie Morrissey, because Alex Spiro brought up something pointing the finger at Seth Kenney. Seth Kenney was originally a person of interest in this case, and then that was ruled out. But Alex Spiro brought that up today, and Carrie Morrissey had this to say on redirect. Let's play that.
Do you have any evidence that Seth Kenney is the source of the live rounds on Rust?
No.
If you know, is there evidence that Hannah Gutierrez brought the live rounds onto the set of Rust?
Yes.
And the state also showed jurors some photographs of some of the rounds on the movie set of Rust, and having that crime scene technician use a red marker to draw the difference between the live and the dummy rounds, saying that the live rounds have a flattened surface and dummy rounds come to a point. During cross-examination, Alex Spiro accused law enforcement of burying important evidence. Let's listen to that.
After the Hannah Gutierrez trial, there was an individual that came to the police station and stated they had ammunition.
He told you it had to do with the Rush shooting, correct?
Yes.
And he told you actually that he was a police officer in a neighboring county, right?
I believe he said he was a retired police officer, yes.
And he told you you all had been duped by Seth Kenney, didn't he?
No.
In words and substance, didn't he?
I don't recall that, no.
Okay. And he said to you, I'm willing to fill out a witness statement, right?
No, I don't recall that.
He told you that the rounds came from a green ammo can, didn't he?
Judge, I have to object to your say.
Sustained.
The crime scene technician did a lot of "I don't recall," and Alex Spiro would say to her, "Really?" So that was interesting to watch that back and forth. Also, during a motions hearing, that was a big moment today in which the judge said that statements, Alec Baldwin's own statements about his knowledge of guns and gun safety can come into this trial. At one point, Carrie Morrissey, the special prosecutor in this case, was talking about Alec Baldwin having a motivation to lie. At that point, he got up and he walked out. The jury was not present. Let's listen to this.
Mr. Baldwin's motivation to lie about pulling the trigger of the gun. I'm 63 years old with 6 kids. I can't rely on luck anymore. He's talking about his career and that he can't rely on luck anymore. This goes exactly to his motivation.
And I was sitting not too far behind Alec Baldwin in the courtroom today, Vinnie, and I noticed him during that motions hearing in which, again, the jurors were not present. He kept turning around and looking to see if his wife was there behind him. She was not. Either was his brother. Stephen, they must have still been at lunch or somewhere, but eventually they did make their way into the courtroom.
Is there any response from anyone about Alec Baldwin getting up and leaving the courtroom in the middle of the prosecutor's argument?
No, not really. But, you know, again, Vinnie, this was out of the presence of the jury. And, you know, we were sitting there, and I noticed him all of a sudden getting up. You know, he said something to someone, and it's really possible maybe he needed to use the restroom, who knows. But it was at this point when Carrie Morrissey was making this argument that Alec Baldwin had a motivation to lie based on some of these statements that he made to Lieutenant Hancock, who was on the stand at the end of the day today, in which he was saying things like, "I'm in my 60s. I have a wife and kids. I can't rely on luck anymore." Carrie Morrissey says that goes to his motivation to lie about whether or not he pulled the trigger. And of course, prosecution says he did pull the trigger.
Yeah, it's a strange moment, unexplained at this moment, and we'll see. But the judge didn't say anything about it, so that's fine. If it's okay with the judge, it should be okay with everyone else. Hannah Gutierrez, I started off the top here saying that she's such an important part of this case because she's the one they're pointing the finger at, but she is set to testify in this case? Prosecutors want to call her?
Yeah, she is on the witness list, Vinnie, and so we have talked with her attorneys, Jason Bowles, who was her defense counsel during the last trial, which we were here covering in Santa Fe. So she is expected to be called as a state witness tomorrow. According to her attorney, she is expected to plead the 5th. So she is serving an 18-month sentence behind bars. She was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in this case, the armorer on the movie set of Rust. Some of the things that we saw during her trial is her saying things like, "I should have checked it more." But of course, as she pleads the 5th, we're not going to hear about any of this stuff tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see on that one.
All right, Kelly, I notice it's getting darker and darker behind you. I just checked the Doppler. I checked the Doppler. You've got to get out of there. So thank you so much. Get to a safe, dry place. Watch out for the thunder. Don't forget, I'm coming out next week. I'm bringing sunshine. Kelly Craft in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thank you so much. Okay, let's talk about Hannah Gutierrez, right? As Kelly reported, she's going to take the 5th. But the prosecution wants to call her. They want her to testify. What would she say? What could she add to all of this? A lot. I mean, she was interviewed by police. There was a lot of information that we received from that. So what I want to do for you is play some of her interviews so you have a little more insight into her perspective, because she is the one that is sort of in the center of everyone's mind as Alec Baldwin is on trial, because she's the one in charge of the guns. Let's take a listen.
Did you load them after lunch?
They were already loaded from before lunch. And so that's the thing is, like, you know, we had that gun the whole time before that, and it was, nothing happened, and I wasn't in there, and they weren't supposed to be even pulling the hammer back.
So, okay, all right, let me just clarify a little bit. So prior to lunch, the guns, you had them out?
Yeah.
And where were they when they were out?
They were inside with all the camera crew and everything. It's, you know, COVID everything happening right now. They don't really like a lot of people in there.
Okay.
And so usually I'm like hardly allowed in there unless there's actual firing happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you inside this morning?
I walked in there and I handed the gun to Alex a couple of times, and Alex took it, and everyone was there with him.
Alec?
Alec.
Okay.
Baldwin, yeah.
Baldwin? Okay, so you handed him the gun this morning.
Yeah.
Does he pass it off to anybody, or were you able to see that?
At one point, Dave had it, the assistant director, but he was just sitting in with it, and then I saw him, and I was like, okay, this is fine. He's just sitting in, and then I walked out, and yeah.
And how do you know that Dave had it?
I handed it off to Dave while he was sitting in for the shot.
Okay. All right, so you guys were the only 3 handlers prior to lunch?
Alec, Dave, me. Dave was after lunch.
So when was the last time you loaded it?
I loaded it so I loaded it with 5 of the dummy rounds before lunch, and there was one that wouldn't go in. And so when we got back from lunch, I took the little cleaner guy, I cleaned it out really quick, and I put another dummy in there.
Okay, so there were 5 total in the gun.
Yeah.
What time did you go to lunch?
Probably about 12:30. Pretty much on the dot.
And then, so after that, Sarah pulled them out.
Yeah.
Did you see her check them, or did she just hand them to you and that's when you checked the rounds?
She just handed us, we all took them, we took them in the bag to the set, so we didn't check them there. They're in little, little socks.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do those look like?
Little socks. They look like...
All right.
Yeah. They honestly look like socks. Yeah.
Okay. And so when you checked it, it was on set or prior to you
Yeah, it was on set. I didn't really check it too much after lunch, because it was already locked up and everything at lunch. But yeah, I checked it and put in that last round and sent it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So once again, prosecutors want to call her tomorrow, put her on the stand. Her attorney saying she's going to take the 5th. How is this all going to play out? What does it mean? Coming up next, our think tank is getting ready. They will answer the question for you. We've got Kirk Nurmi, Meg Strickler, and Nima Rahmani ready to go. They've got the answer. I don't.
A-list actor Alec Baldwin is cast in the real-life role he never wanted.
I try and cock the gun, the gun goes off.
Criminal defendant.
His lack of gun safety is something that he's going to have to answer for.
We heard that this was a toxic set.
One more.
It's not his fault. He did nothing wrong.
Is there an actor's exemption from liability when they're handling a deadly firearm?
The Alec Baldwin Manslaughter Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings only on Court TV.
You doing okay?
No!
As a direct result of her failures, Ms. Gutierrez caused Ms. Hutchins' death.
Rust Production and the state want to scapegoat her.
What's your job there with them?
I'm the armor. Or at least I was.
The actor, Alec Baldwin, pointed a gun on that set. He pulled the trigger.
Hannah Gutierrez, the armorer, just 24 years old, in the middle of all of this. It's her second movie, and Alec Baldwin and his defense team pointing the finger at her, saying it's her fault. It's not Alec's fault. Her job was the safety of the gun. She loaded the gun. It was not Alec. He should not be held criminally responsible. She should, and she was, and she's in prison right now, got 18 months of prison. Well, here's the latest now. The prosecution wants to call, they prosecuted her, sent her to prison. Now they want to call her to the witness stand in the case against Alec Baldwin. It's fascinating strategy taking place here. Let me show you more of Hannah Gutierrez. This is her from her police interview. Again, She's in the middle of all this. Obviously, it was her job. There's just a few people that are touching this gun, and she's the one who loaded it.
What's your guys' protocol for the ammo?
Protocol.
Like, what do you have in place? You know, are you supposed to check them every day? How often?
Basically, like, you know, our protocol for the ammo is, like, you know, I have to know load sizes. I have to know, like, who's in the proximity, if it's a child, if it's a horse. And my protocol really is a lot of checking for barrel obstructions, mostly because that's where a lot of mistakes get made, is like just blanks behind something, and a lot of guns get thrown into, like, dropped in rocks, you know, and rocks get into the barrel and fly out and so my is mostly just checking the barrel and everything, and then making sure the dummies are dummies. Yeah, and I've never really had any that didn't sound like dummies.
Well, it's her job. Now, my understanding is she had additional responsibilities on that set, which boggles my mind. Now, again, she's being called by the prosecution in this case. Now, her attorney, Jason Bowles, who represented her at her trial that you saw here on Court TV, spoke to me about this and how this is going to play out. Take a listen.
So now, after having been convicted at trial, sentenced to 18 months, the prosecution doesn't want to offer her anything, but they want to force her, compel her to testify against Baldwin. And they're predicting in their motion what she might say, although they've never talked to her. Because when they tried to interview her, Hannah invoked her Fifth Amendment privilege, as she is entitled to do. Because not only is she facing an appeal, Vinnie, she's also been charged with a separate crime by the special prosecutor for bringing a gun into a bar in Santa Fe. So that's yet another charge that they are trying to pin on her. So again, the unfairness is really complete. And we're going to assert her Fifth Amendment privilege.
So how is this going to play out tomorrow in Alec Baldwin's trial? Let me bring in some experts. Tonight's think tank joining us, criminal defense attorney Meg Strickler. Also with us, criminal defense attorney, the lawyer who represented that woman out in Arizona somewhere, Kirk Nurmi, and president of the West Coast Trial Lawyers and former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Great to see everyone tonight. I've seen it done so many different ways. No, not so many, but I've seen the fifth taken in front of the jury. I've seen the fifth taken in the presence of the judge, and then the witness never shows up. So what's going on here, Meg? What do you think is going on here? How is this going to play out tomorrow?
I think, just like you heard, she's going to assert her fifth. She's got nothing from those prosecutors, so why would she ever wish to work with them, period? Now, that might change. You know, if they go ahead and say, you know what, forget about the 18 months, we'll waive the appeal and we'll let you out of jail, then that might change, and that might have already changed. We don't know about it, but I doubt it. So she's going to assert her fifth. She's not going to say anything, because she could be retried if something were to come back on appeal and they have to retry the case.
Nima, let me ask you, as a former federal prosecutor, what are prosecutors doing here? What's the strategy?
Well, the strategy before the motions in limine, Vinnie, were to get some evidence that would tie Baldwin's role as a producer to the criminal liability. Now, that's all gone out the door. So I think what the state is doing is this. They want to get out all the bad evidence before the jury. They want to tell the jurors during closing arguments that we call Hannah Gutierrez Reed. And even though she was convicted, and even though she is also responsible, that doesn't mean Alec Baldwin isn't. And we wanted you to hear her story, but she chose to invoke the fifth. They don't want the defense pointing to the empty chair more than they already are. And this is a strategy of fronting bad evidence for those jurors, something that, frankly, they should have done yesterday when that 911 call came in. The defense got that in during cross. It should have come in during the case in chief.
All right, trying to demonstrate a little transparency. All right, Kirk, you're a lot closer to New Mexico than we are, although I'll be closer next week when I'm there. Hopefully you'll come join us. What are your thoughts about this Fifth Amendment issue? And is this going to be in front of the jury? Will the jury see this moment? I always find it dramatic when someone takes the stand in front of a jury and says, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right, and everyone goes, oh. Like, what does it mean? What is the jury going to do with that?
Yeah, in Arizona, that's a big no-no, calling someone that you know is going to plead the fifth. Now, if they do this in front of the jury, you know, keep in mind something that happened today. We're in, to me, in the weeds, a lot of irrelevant material. But the fact that she was convicted of a crime came out today. So now if the state of New Mexico puts her on the witness stand and she pleads the fifth, the jury already knows she's convicted of a crime. They're going to wonder what else is she hiding. And obviously there's going to be no cross-examination, and the defense is really going to get to have a field day with that in terms of closing argument, because we heard there's live ammo on set. The armor is supposed to prevent that. Can they get into her drug use? Are they going to be able to bring up some of these issues tangentially in a different way, right? Through the investigating officer, maybe, that they learn that she is drugged. So to me, this is a horrible move for the state of New Mexico, and probably the only good thing that happened for the Baldwin defense team today was the fact that Ms. Gutierrez was convicted, came out before them. And this is going to further strengthen his case, his argument that she's responsible.
You know, Meg, when you talk about this case with folks, and a lot more people are talking about it now it's actually happening, and, you know, people text me, people talk to me. Everyone wants to talk about her. And it seems like she is Alec Baldwin's shield in this case. This 24-year-old who is, you know, being the armorer for her second movie. She did a Nicolas Cage movie before this. And she's the, you know, defense attorneys always want to point the finger somewhere, but this is a place you can obviously point it. So do you think the jury is going to just sit back and say, okay, well, one person's responsible, or, you know, more than one can be responsible for what happened here?
I think they're going to use their past experiences and think about how everything works in life. And it's very difficult for everything to happen in just little tiny snippets. It's always involving multiple people here. So like you just said, she's 24, she's young. You can tell she's young. She looks innocent. I mean, innocent meaning she looks young in the sense of not experienced. Let me rephrase that word of innocent. But what I think is very important here is, but for this never would have happened, okay? And so there's some responsibility of using this gun and having your own, and his reckless disregard. The fact that he didn't even think to look at that gun or ask anybody about this gun prior to using it and pulling that trigger. And I know there's some discrepancy about whether or not he pulled the trigger, but clearly that's what happened, and this horrible thing has occurred. Horrible thing.
Nima, as we search for the truth here, I mean, there are some facts that are sort of in dispute, right? I think it's pretty subtle here. This isn't a whodunit. We kind of know what happened here. You know, how did the live round exactly get here? There's some discrepancy about that. Did he squeeze the trigger? Did he not squeeze the trigger? There might be a little bit of discrepancy there. But for the most part, everyone knows what it is. I see this case as almost like a case for the jury to test the jury's conscience. Like, where does this jury draw the line in responsibility? And are they going to carve out an exemption for gun safety for actors?
Well, I agree, Vinnie, and there's different levels of responsibility, right? We talked about different people. Obviously, Baldwin's civilly responsible, but there's no question that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is the most responsible. I believe that she brought the live rounds on set. That's what her jury found. So then you have Assistant Director Dave Hall. Let's not forget about him. He's the one who reportedly said it was a cold gun. He was offered a no-time misdemeanor deal, a slap on the wrist. I think Baldwin would be the third most responsible. And the question is, even if you thought it was a cold gun, even if you thought it was empty, should you point the gun at another human being and pull the trigger? I do believe the FBI ballistics report that says that trigger was pulled. I think the defense is going to have to walk away from that Stephanopoulos interview where Baldwin said he didn't pull the trigger. He at least admitted to cocking the hammer back. So that's a question for the jury. Is that enough for criminal responsibility for manslaughter? If someone gives you a gun, they tell you it's a cold gun, it's not loaded, you're an actor, you're practicing the scene. Should you point it at the cinematographer who actually asks you to point the gun at her, and should you pull the trigger? And if the answer is no, is that enough for criminal manslaughter?
And Kirk, there seemed to be a lot of miscommunication and chaos here, because in her interview, we heard Hannah Gutierrez say they weren't supposed to pull the hammer back in this rehearsal. And, you know, certain people are supposed to be there when they're actually doing the firing scene, right? Versus this rehearsal that they were doing. I mean, the cameras weren't even rolling at the time. The cameras were rolling on the rehearsal in the morning, but not in the afternoon. They were getting ready to film this scene. How important is that part, and does that play a role in trying to figure out culpability here? Because Hannah Gutierrez is saying, well, they're not even supposed to be pulling the hammer back there, and that would be his actions. He's the one holding the gun. He's the one pulling the hammer back.
Well, I don't know how much credibility Hannah Gutierrez or her analysis is going to have on the situation, especially if she's pleading the fifth. But let's talk about, when we talk about culpability, Vinnie, I think we need to go back to industry standards. And I'm sure we're going to hear this from the defense, because a few days ago, the Screen Actors Guild came out and said that Alec Baldwin is not, as an actor in that position, is not tied to the responsibility, not tied to the culpability, as Neiman just said. That goes to Hannah Gutierrez and Dave Hall. So I think that could be the big point with this jury as it relates to culpability.
Well, Kirk, can I just call you out on that? Can I call you out on that? Like, is any union going to go against a member of the union and say they were wrong? Like, SAG is like a union, right?
But it's also the industry standard, right? They're talking about what the industry standard is for safety and protocol. And as a matter of fact, all the witnesses are going to back that up. Even when we heard that 911 call that Neva mentioned earlier, there was reference to Dave Hall. Dave Hall screwed up. He didn't check. Everybody agrees related to the protocol. That's why we have an armor, et cetera. So I don't think it lacks credibility when you have something like the Screen Actors Guild coming before it. And I think the jury could certainly use that as reason to avoid putting criminal culpability on Alec. Civil culpability, we know that's happened, but criminal culpability, that's a gross deviation from those standards, and I don't think he did that.
All right, our tank's staying with us. When we come back, we're going to shift the focus back to the victim in this case, Halyna Hutchins, and her family. What's going on with them, and how do they feel about all of this?
Of course, it's very disturbing that Alec Baldwin, even though I've urged him publicly, which I never should have had to do, to at least contact the mother, the grieving mother, and say, I'm sorry that this happened. I don't care if he would say this was an accident, even though, of course, it's charged as a crime, not as an accident. But he's never had the decency to do that. Never had the decency to even have his attorney contact me, knowing that I represent her, and say, can we arrange a call with the mother? And I would have a translator. He could have a translator on the phone. It's just a decent thing to do. He has never contacted any of them, even though he's the one who had the gun in his hand that had a live bullet. And he says, of course, he never pulled the trigger or didn't intend to pull the trigger, whatever his latest story is about that. And it doesn't matter. The bullet came out of the gun and hit and killed their daughter and their beloved sister.
Ted Rowland's at the courthouse with famed attorney and victim advocate Gloria Allred, who many of you know is also my former anchor-in-law. I used to co-anchor right here on Court TV with her daughter, Lisa Bloom, another great attorney. She's representing the family of Halyna Hutchins. And this is not the husband and the children, but the mother, the father, and sibling of Halyna Hutchins. And they're not in this country. They don't live here. You know, the husband and the children live here. They had a settlement of their civil case, but the rest of the family also has a wrongful death case against Alec Baldwin and others associated with the film. So that interview continued today, and I thought it was fascinating to hear that perspective, because we haven't heard much from the victim throughout all of this. Throughout all of this, we've seen her face. We've spoken to friends. We understand the great work that she did, the talent she had. She was an amazing mother. We've heard bits and pieces, but it was nice today to hear a little bit more about her. Here's Gloria Allred speaking again with Ted Rowland.
I do think that, you know, the defense argument that somehow that this has to be, he didn't have the intent to kill her, if it's not necessary for this crime, as was pointed out in court yesterday by the prosecution.
And nobody believes he tried to kill Helena Hutchins.
Yeah, but all the prosecution has to prove is, of course, that negligent handling of a firearm, or that he acted without due caution or circumspection, and the prosecution, of course, intends to show reckless behavior by Alec Baldwin.
And is it reckless for him to, because the defense says he's following the directions of Helena and of Joel Souza. He is, he didn't bring the live round onto the set.
I think I heard that in the Holocaust trials, right? Just following orders. And somehow that he doesn't have any responsibility for safety.
That's a great point. Let's bring back in our think tank, Meg Strickler, Kirk Nurmi, Nima Romani. Kirk, I'll begin with you. Your reaction to Gloria Allred. Either point, whether the fact that Alec Baldwin hasn't reached out to Helena's parents or, the gist of what she's saying, like an actor has no responsibility for the safety of a gun?
Well, look, Vinny, in honesty, I'm not a fan of turning tragedy into theatrics, and making references to the Holocaust, I think, is totally inappropriate of her. We don't know we know that Alec reconciled with the husband. We don't know what conversations they've had. So, for her to make these statements without having the full context, I would take a lot of issue with. But certainly, in all these high-profile tragedies, we don't want to lose sight of the victim. We don't want to lose sight of the tragedy, but nobody thought this was on purpose. This was a tragic accident. They were friends, and Alec is also suffering and mourning the loss of his friend.
Meg, what's the difference between someone who has a weapon and inspects it, but mistakenly thinks there are no live rounds in it, and then, waves it and points it and squeezes the trigger, and what Alec Baldwin did? Like, is there a difference between those two people? Like, that person's relying on themselves, but they made a mistake. He's relying on someone else who made a mistake.
And like we know in law, there's never black and white. So, there are already discussions that he was somebody who should have had training, safety training, and there's already evidence that's going to come out that when he's taking this training class, that he was on his phone, he's not listening, and he's distracted with his family on set, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are showing that he's not focused. If he's focused on being an actor, well, then focus on being an actor, great, but you still must. You're handling a gun. That's the thing that just blows me away. Guns scare me, and I don't understand how anyone else wouldn't be. By scaring me, we have to handle them properly. So why isn't that done here?
Nima Romani, I remember a famous lawyer said in a famous trial in Los Angeles that O.J. Simpson in a knit cap is still O.J. Simpson, something like that, right? But, a gun on the set of a movie is still a gun. It's still a gun. It doesn't cease to be a gun. And I think there's a lot of people that don't look at it that way.
Well, Vinny, it is still a gun, and when you're talking about civil liability, there's no question that Alec Baldwin is civilly liable. And with all due respect to Gloria Allred, who is representing the parents and the sister, the real civil case, Matt Hutchins' civil case, he's a lawyer himself here in Los Angeles. He was represented by another lawyer, Brian Panish, and we showed part of the animation that his firm created. He settled with Alec Baldwin for himself and the kids. And he came out and said that this was a tragic accident and that Baldwin shouldn't be criminally prosecuted. I think he's going to be one of the key defense witnesses in this case.
Oh, wait. Say that one more time, Nima. Who's going to be this big defense witness?
I think Matt Hutchins is going to testify for the defense in this case. Now, he is a co-executive
producer. a widower?
I believe so.
Wow.
I believe so.
Wow.
And that's my prediction. He's a co-executive producer of Rust. He got equity in the film. He entered into a civil settlement. And obviously, all these cases are about the victims. But if that particular victim testifies, I think that's going to be very powerful.
Powerful stuff. That's why we have him on, folks. Nima Romani, Kirk Nurmi, Meg Strickler. Great to see you tonight, Kirk. I'm counting on you coming to Santa Fe next week.